Welcome to the Diversity Report podcast, where you hear from the diverse movers and shakers, change makers, and thought leaders around the country. I'm Deborah Levine, your host, an award-winning author and editor-in-chief of the American Diversity Report. Today's guest is Jan Levine Fall, the artistic director of a women's theater in Madison, Wisconsin. Hi, Jan.
Hello.
It's so good to have you here. Tell us about this wonderful project of yours. What's its name?
The Kathy Rasmussen Women's Theater, also known as CRAS Theater, because Kathy Rasmussen Women's Theater is kind of a mouthful, was founded in 2008 to produce work written and directed by women in Madison, Wisconsin. We are a non-professional theater. In other words, we don't pay people. We actually do pay people, but not very much. And we are not an equity house as much as we'd love to be. But the reason that we exist is because in the community theater world, and actually in the professional theater world as well, there was at the time where we got started, when we first started to discuss this in the early 2000s, there were very few productions that were written or directed by women.
I see. And how many women's theaters are there across the country today?
The best known one is in New York City, the Women's Theater in New York City, founded by Julia Stiles. And I said Julia Stiles, that's incorrect. It's Julia Miles. That one is a professional theater. Most of the companies there's a mix of professional and non-professional. Almost none of them call themselves women's theaters. So I am shouting out right now on your podcast to say if there are other women's theaters that would like to form a national consortium of women's theaters, I would love to be part of that.
Thank you. When you look at the growth of women in theater, whether it's directors or writers, what do you see happening?
It is still true that considering the number of women who are active in theater, many more women actors than men, for example, at least in non-professional theater, there are many more women. In professional theater, I think you see more men. Given the number of women that are part of theater, who created theater, who direct theater, who run theater companies, there's still far too few women artistic leaders. And by artistic leaders in this specific sense, I mean writers and directors. On Broadway, there's been quite a change over the last 10 or 15 years. And one of the leaders of that change is a playwright I very much admire, Teresa Rebeck. But there are a lot of other playwrights who have really come to prominence, people like Sarah Rule and Rebecca Gilman, and I could go on. And one of our missions is to try to find local and regional playwrights who aren't getting the attention of the big playwrights and try to put them on stage too. So one of the playwrights we picked is a woman named Marissa Wegerson, who wrote a wonderful play called The Butcher of Baraboo, which is actually about a woman who is a butcher in Baraboo. It's not a horror piece. It's about a woman who works as a worker, as a butcher. But anyway, the funny title got us a lot of audience, and the play was really wonderful. And then she went on to win the Wendy Wasserstein Prize. So I was very proud of the fact that we found her before she became famous. And she's from Chicago, even though Baraboo is a town in Wisconsin.
Tell me about the prize that you just mentioned. What is that?
Wendy Wasserstein was the first woman to win a Tony Award for her for Best Play. So in all the many, many years of the Tonys, which I think we're now in the 67th or 68th year, I think there have been fewer than 10 women who won Best Play, and fewer than 10 women who won Best Musical. And as writers, this is. And So someone established, and I'm actually not sure whether it was the American Theater Wing or who's established this Wendy Wasserstein Prize, but it's particularly for women playwrights to encourage women playwrights. And I'm excited that someone someone whose work we chose to do, won that prize.
Excellent. When you look at women in writing and theater and staging and the various beautiful roles that they should be playing in theater, what kind of advice would you give a young person who wants to have that role and be successful?
So number one, read. There are wonderful women playwrights whose work is not done that much. In addition to the people I mentioned a few minutes ago, Lynn Nottage has won a bunch of prizes. It's an African American playwright and has written these mind-blowing pieces, just beautiful pieces. Most of her work is too difficult for us to do here in Madison, Wisconsin, because we don't have the budget for it. Some of them are period pieces and so on, but the pieces are beautiful and definitely worth reading. Another playwright I became aware of recently wrote a play called Detroit 67. Her name is Dominique Morisseau, and she's actually written a bunch of plays about Detroit and some other things. Detroit 67 was about the riots in Detroit in 1967 and the relationship between the Black community and the police and so on. It's really an amazing piece, and we did perform that one, and we got just terrific community response. But also, all of the playwrights I mentioned, and any playwrights you can get your hands on, there's things at the library, there are things that are relatively cheap or free online. And the reason I say people should read first is that I feel like people should know what's out there, because every once in a while you'll have someone say, hey, I have an idea for a play. See, there's this Prince of Denmark, and you go, okay, so do you know that there's actually already a play about that? So I think it's important to be conscious of what's out there and what people are already doing. And also what I feel is that every time I come across new plays, I'm aware that there are all these playwrights who are doing really innovative things, really interesting use of multimedia, use of characterizations that I wouldn't have thought of in the past. And I think it's very important to be kind of up on what's happening in theater because it's exciting and beautiful, and there's no reason for us to continue to do plays that are 50 years old. And that a lot of theater companies do that. They do the tried and true ones that they know are going to bring in audience. Because we're a very small company and we don't have much of a budget and so on, and most of our budget is spent on venue and rights. That's pretty much all. We do pay everybody a little bit, but basically venue and rights are our big expenses. Because of that, we have been able to take some chances on doing unusual plays, and we're inspired by, there's a local theater company that does unusual musicals. We're inspired by them. We're inspired by other people across the country. And I feel like this is something that anyone who's aspiring to be part of the theater community should know about.
Do you feel that the women writers add something specific, unique to what is happening in this environment?
You know, that's a really good question, because I feel on the fence about that question, and here's what I mean. I feel like every playwright adds something unique, because everyone comes from their own vision of the world and their own sense of what's important and so on. So in that sense, I would say women playwrights are not different from men. They bring their own sensibilities and they write a play or a story from that perspective. But on the other hand, the reason that women have been dismissed, I think, I mean, I don't know what, if you went back in history and asked every single person who's dismissed a woman playwright, they would probably all have different ideas. But the usual language is these works aren't as good as men's works. And I think by as good as, I think they really mean there is a formula for what we think is good theater, and many of these plays do not follow that formula. And I think that's also true of plays by people of color, men of color as well as women, that These are not what a play is supposed to be. But then that was, if you go back and look at the history of theater, that many times theater changed because someone broke the rules. Someone said, no, plays don't have to be about kings. They can be about an ordinary salesman. Or, no, plays don't have to be all about living people. Some of them can be dead. And by that, I'm referring to Thornton Wilder's very famous play. Right now I can't even think of the name of it, but I'm sure all of your listeners know it. But I think the important thing is that it's really good to keep breaking the rules and still within the rules of telling a good story. And that's why I said I have mixed feelings. Do women bring a particular sensibility as women? I don't know. I think each individual brings a particular sensibility, and I certainly wouldn't want to restrict women to writing about particular subjects because that's women's sensibility. I think all sensibilities, women get to have them all, just like men do.
What advice would you give to a woman who would like to write a play and is starting out and would be open to various ideas, including your suggestions? What would you say?
I think the important thing is to be conscious. So here's what I tell people who write 10-minute plays, because we sometimes do festivals of 10-minute plays. We've done 2 so far. And the reason for that is to try to give a lot of people a chance to write. And we're actually just about to announce submission guidelines for a new one. Is to give, so that we'll do 10 plays, 10-minute plays in an evening. Instead of one person's work, we'll do 10 people's work. And that's part of our mission, is to try to give voice to people who haven't had a voice before. So what I say to those people about how to structure their play is to start with a problem. Do not start with background. Do not say, oh, it's a beautiful day and everyone's eating pie and the sun is shining and so on. I'm bored already. But if you say, here's something that went wrong, and it's the first 2 or 3 sentences of the play. The house is on fire, grandpa's stuck in a tree, whatever. Then you're already off to the races with something that's interesting. But it doesn't have to be a normal problem. Like one of my favorite plays of recent years was by Rajiv Joseph. It's called the Bengal Tiger in the Baghdad Zoo, and he's a male playwright, by the way. But he starts out with a tiger in the Baghdad Zoo. He's a tiger. That's one of the characters, and he's mad because the people who were taking care of him ran off and left the zoo, and he doesn't have any food, and he's hungry. So that's the problem that starts the play. Everything about that is unusual. There's a tiger played by a person. It was played on Broadway by Robin Williams. Why did the people run off? Well, you find out eventually it's a function of the war. What is he going to do about food because he's stuck in this cage? And you find out that eventually. So it's you've started with a problem, and that's what I would say to a playwright. Start with a problem. If you're writing a 10-minute play, by about page 6, you have to have made the problem worse. So because that's what this is. A writing teacher once said to me is, writers often fall in love with their characters and don't want them to get in trouble, but audiences want them to be in trouble. And I think that's correct. So whatever is wrong in that first moment has to get more wrong. And often that becomes more wrong because people have tried to solve the problem in a way that's not effective. And then at the end of your 10-minute play, you have to have a resolution, but it doesn't have to be a happy ending. The tiger can eat everyone. That is not what happens in Reggie Joseph's play. But the point is, it doesn't have to be a happy ending, but it has to be a resolution of some sort. Now, there certainly are plays where everything is unresolved in the last moment, and some of those plays are just beautiful and fantastic. So even that formula that I just gave you isn't written in stone.
Well, I'm delighted that you're doing this for people and giving them a voice and an opportunity to try out their skills. Uh, do you have a website where people can go to get more information about what you're doing?
Yes. However, we have not put up the submission guidelines yet, but we'll probably do it in the next 2 weeks. I can tell you about what that festival will be. It is, our website is KRASS and Sam, KRASS, Craft Theater, TheAtre.com. So it's crafttheater.com, and you can find pictures of our former productions. You can find our announcement for the play that we're in the process of producing right now, which is a wonderful, fantastic play called Morticians in Love. And if you think it's about necrophilia, you're kind of right, but then you're also kind of wrong. So come see it. And that's a play by Christy Stewart Brown that's just amazing that you take this thing that sounds like it's completely taboo, necrophilia, and you use it to talk about the conflict between unconditional love and unrequited love. And at the same time, it's just hilarious. So, of course, you have to be open. You have to come in with an open mind, because if the first thing you're going to do is go, ew, I don't think you'll like the play. We keep saying to people, don't bring your children.
Well, it sounds like you give people not only a voice in terms of theater and arts, but in terms of social issues of the day, and in putting them in the artistic context so that people can better understand them and digest them. Would you say that would be one of the goals?
Absolutely. I always hesitate to say that we have a preference for socially conscious plays, because I still want to say that women have the right to write about anything they want, just like men have the right to write about anything they want. I personally tend to choose plays that I think have some universal meaning, so that when we did Detroit 67, I felt like the issues of racism that play raised are still issues that the community cares about, especially a community like Madison, Wisconsin, which is very liberal-minded in general. And yet the Black community, which came out very, very strongly for this play, will tell you that the white community is not conscious enough of racism, and that many of the things described in that play are still true 50 years later. So that was very exciting, to be able to not only to do this play, and we had this wonderful director named Dana Pelabon, who was just fantastic, and this great cast, but not only were we able to do this play and have everybody in the audience respond to it very viscerally, but also we had talkbacks after many of the performances, where people got a chance to express what they felt about the play, and that was a really exciting process that we're very proud of.
So as we enter into 2017, and we have so many diverse social issues in this country roiling around, what do you expect will happen in the community with your plays? Will the discussion be even bigger and greater?
I don't know the answer to that, because one of the things about the arts is you can never predict where things are going, which is fantastic. I love that. Our next season, which we have planned, is not directly responsive to what's going on in the national scene. But, for example, the first play we're doing is a Sarah Rule play called The Melancholy Play. This is assuming that we get rights. I have not yet applied for rights. And that play is about depression, and it's actually a comedy about depression, which sounds like a contradiction in terms. But I feel as if in a community like this one, which was had a very different opinion from the Electoral College about what should happen in the presidential elections, that there are a lot of people who are going around saying, I'm really depressed. So I feel like in an indirect way, doing a play about depression is speaking to needs in the community. And I have a couple of other plays that we're doing. We're doing a play about a couple that has a child who may or may not be on the autism spectrum. And in a period where we have somebody who is the head of the head of the Department of Education, who basically hates public schools, you wonder, well, what's going to happen to the public school programs for people who are special needs of one sort and another? So I feel like we are addressing I think art often addresses things, but obliquely, that are going on in the real world, and that the kind of plays we choose are always going to address something that's going on in the real world, even though it's not necessarily, here's what we think Trump Tower should be decorated as, or whatever.
Right. Well, I appreciate that, and I think you're going to have a lot of food for thought as the year unfolds. And as we wrap up, is there anything that you would like to add that I haven't asked yet?
So one of the areas where women have had the least success, not none, but comparatively to men, is as directors. And on Broadway, there are some very famous, fantastic women's directors. There's Julie Taymor, there's Susan Stroman, and there are a lot more whose names aren't coming to my mind right now. But still, the majority of directors on Broadway are men, and the majority of directors in community theater and in professional theater are men. And there are lots of reasons for that, some of which are that some of those men are wonderful directors. I'm sure they're terrific. But I feel as if women also need to really do what they can to, women who wish to be directors, not everyone wants to be a director, should do whatever they can to get training, to be assistant directors, whatever, to put themselves in the position to become directors. Because that is an area where I feel like sensibilities are different. And part of that is that the relationship between the director and the actors is different if the director is female. And also, as an older person, I will tell you that the relationships are different between young actors and an older director. And I usually start out when I talk to actors by saying, just in case you're interested, I'm not mom. But the training for being a director is complicated, because one of the part that people know about is vision. Here's what I would like this play to look like. The part that people don't know about is all of the many, many detailed practical things that you need to know to be a director. And I think you don't learn them unless you get training or unless you have experience. And I think a lot of women don't have an opportunity to get that experience, and I encourage everybody to get it however you can.
Well, thank you. I mean, you make me want to go out and direct a play tomorrow.
I'm glad, because actually I have some ideas for you.
We will talk. But in the meantime, I want to direct our audience again to your website, which is, go ahead.
KRASSTHEATRE, crashtheater.com.
And enjoy all of the great work that Jan and her colleagues are doing in Madison, and see if you can contact them if you're interested in forming that collaboration that she mentioned. So thank you again, Jan, and to our audience.
Thank you.
And we'll be back with another podcast shortly. Bye-bye.
All right. Thanks. Bye-bye.